You're listening to the Greeks Gridiron. Now here's your host, Ethan Haristadoulou.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Greeks Gridiron. I am Ethan Haristadoulou, and it's that time once again to dive into some power rankings following Week 9 of the UFL as we head into week number 10, the final week of the regular season. We had a couple of really big upsets, a nearly third upset with the Panthers and Roughnecks. A lot happened this week, shaking up the way the playoff picture looks like, especially on the XFL side. So comment down below. Let me hear your thoughts on this past weekend's games. Let me hear your power rankings, your thoughts on mine, and we'll dive in starting with the number 18 at the very bottom. As they have been for at least nearly 2 months now, the Memphis Showboats on an 8-game losing streak, falling 36-21. It was nice to see Memphis at least cross the 20-point mark. It's been a tough one for them to do over the duration of the season. Through their 9 games played, they have only crossed 20 points 3 different occasions. So nice to see them at least hit past that 20-point barrier they seem to be struggling with. But it took the league's worst rushing defense, but Memphis did manage 126 yards on the ground, couple of rushing touchdowns as well, and in one of their better offensive performances, they allowed only 2 sacks in this game here. I'm trying to pick some positives out, but for a team that's averaging a little bit over 4 sacks a game right now, I think 2 sacks is a win. But despite those positives, there's really not much else to go on about, especially when you look at the defensive side. I mean, the defense all season has just been really, really tough, struggling to really stop anything. I mean, 36 points allowed, 431 total yards allowed, total touchdowns sitting at 5 when everything was all said and done. Like, even though you came away with a couple of interceptions off of Jordan Teamu, there was really just not a whole lot that Memphis was able to do against DC, and you basically gave DC their best offensive performance of the season. And I mean, with the way this defense has looked, it's not too surprising that DC was able to get their best performance, but it's tough nonetheless. That being said, with where Memphis is, as I've been saying the last few weeks, I anticipate a lot of changes, we're probably going to see a roster overhaul, and just at this point, it feels like players are just trying to put on the best tape possible to hopefully find themselves somewhere this fall, or at least on a practice squad during the duration of the summertime leading into the NFL season. But talk about a tough last place finish for the Memphis Showboats, and I think that at this point here, they'll probably be sitting as the number 8 team to wrap up the season following next weekend. Moving into number 7, we have ourselves the Houston Roughnecks. Now, the Roughnecks losing 26-22 in a bit of a nail-biter against the Michigan Panthers here. It's been a long season for Houston, a really tough one at that, but they do have some positives kind of stacking up here at the end of the season, so it is kind of nice to see that for the team. A little too late, but it's nice to kind of see them picking up some positives as the season wraps itself up. Third quarter was where a lot of the magic happened for Houston, especially on the offensive side, putting up 19 of their 22 total points. There was a bit of a back and forth going on at quarterback between Reed Sinnett and Nolan Henderson early, but Henderson kind of found somewhat of some success, ripped off a couple of nice touchdown passes to Jaron Hall, who obviously one of them being that 63-yard sprint to the end zone there, caught the ball on like a slant and was just gone. Nobody was able to catch him. Hit another one to Jaron Hall as well a little bit after that. But aside from just kind of taking advantage of what felt like some really big, just blown defensive breakdowns or miscommunication, whatever it was between the Michigan Panthers defense, it's not like they were finding a ton of success because it wasn't pretty. Like, Nolan Henderson's completion rate was not great, and on top of that, like it was very much, you were put into some good situations, you took advantage. So while there is good to take away from it, there is also like the reality of a few of those big plays really only happened because it looked like Michigan's defense was just like either completely caught off guard by what was going on, or there was a communication breakdown somewhere leading before that final snap of the football. So I don't want to take away from what Houston was doing in this game here, but you got 19 points all racked up in one quarter, and when you look at how it was going down, it just felt like a lot of it had to do with miscues from Michigan's end. So there are some positives to take away, but I don't want to sit here and act like it was all by Houston's doing. There is some of that being Michigan's part as well. Defensively, I would say a pretty good game from them, and honestly, if it wasn't for a couple of, just bad situations that they got put into, especially once Bryce Perkins came in and basically we've seen Houston struggle with quarterbacks that are able to move with their legs, and they were honestly dominating in the first half. It looked great. I mean, they were shutting things down, virtually no success allowing Michigan to run the football. Like, running backs totaled 12 carries for 35 yards. Danny Etling was not really having a great game. It was just Bryce Perkins came in, and his ability with his legs, like, you caught the lucky break off the tipped interception when he first came in that first drive. But after that, I mean, it just felt like Houston has a really hard time containing those mobile quarterbacks and deciding whether to go after the quarterback or to not go after the quarterback on certain plays. And Perkins just presents such a threat with his legs. It's one of those things that they clearly struggled with. And on top of that, Cioce Mariner was killing them. There was no answer for him as well. He caught 8 catches for nearly 100 yards. I mean, there was a lot going on that they were struggling with in that second half. But I don't want to say it was a bad game by any means. It was a good one. They kept it close. Credit where it is due, because Michigan is a playoff team. But again, even in the close games, it's easy to kind of pick out some of the things that you're seeing from Houston where you're like, well, you're kind of getting away with this or that. But I'm really hoping for a little more balance on the bottom side of the UFL, and this will kind of roll into me talking about the number 6 team as well here. But I'm hoping that these bottom teams that are really struggling get a nice infusion of talent, because they all feel like they're maybe like a piece or two away from really being competitive and balancing out the league a little bit more. So it's not like Houston, especially with a really good defense, one that can completely annihilate run games on any given week. It's not like they're not a good team. It's just they're missing like that key piece or two that would really help push them over the edge and help turn these really tight games into actual victories. Coming in at the number 6 spot, we have ourselves the Arlington Renegades here. Talk about a big victory over St. Louis here, with the opportunity to complicate things for their division rival. They chose Carpe Diem and got the job done here. Luis Perez catching absolute fire at the midpoint of this game, torching the league's best pass defense coming into this matchup to the tune of 259 yards and 3 passing touchdowns. Sal Cannella, Isaiah Winstead, and Seth Green all catching touchdown passes. 6 different receivers all catching 3 passes or more through the duration of the game. There was a point where St. Louis, who again, best passing defense in the league for a bulk majority of the season, just looked like they had not a single answer for what Perez was orchestrating from the pocket here. Their running backs even looked pretty solid as well. They didn't have a ton of attempts, but 81 yards, averaging 4.5 yards per clip. This offense was humming during that midpoint of the game. The defense, has still kind of being the defense as it is, 338 yards allowed, but they did come away with some good, small victories throughout the game here, and I think it's those small battles that really helped them win out here, like holding St. Louis to just 4 of 11 on third down, forced fumble on St. Louis's second drive to kind of kill any momentum early, 3 interceptions, obviously very opportunistic to wrap up the game there and shutting down any possible hope of a comeback, and it was those small little battles that I think the defense did win ultimately that helped lead them to a victory over their division rivals here, and it was enough to put the team over the hump in this matchup here. With nothing left to do but basically just kind of upset opponents, I think Arlington has done a really good job being competitive towards the end of the season, even with the state of their season being where it was, even just if you go back to 3 weeks ago where it felt like the season was practically wrapped up. Arlington has made it messy for St. Louis. There's a win, even if it's kind of a moral victory for the season. And I'll be interested in seeing what happens now to St. Louis next week, should they not win and potentially lose home field throughout through the playoffs, if that affects anything for them. But there's a lot to look at now, and you can thank the number 6 Arlington Renegades for all of that. Moving into number 5, we have ourselves the DC Defenders here. Big victory for them over the Memphis Showboats. As I mentioned earlier, it took the worst team and arguably the worst defense in the UFL for it, but DC's offense had a fantastic showing in this game, and this was kind of the performance that I think DC was hoping for all season from their offense. And when you look at the numbers, 431 total yards of offense. You got efforts and great efforts at that from both your passing game and your running game here. Teamu, 20 of 24, best completion percentage of the season for him, 237 yards, couple of touchdowns. He even had a rushing touchdown as well, and if it wasn't for 2 interceptions that he threw during the game there, he probably would have been even further apart of a matchup here, and you're probably looking at 40 plus points on DC's end and less than 20 from Memphis's end here. But Darius Hagens excuse me, and Cameron Harris both had really solid efforts as well, combining for nearly 90 yards and about almost 4 yards per carry, a couple of point yards underneath, but almost 4 yards per carry on the day. You were 8 of 13 on third down. This was a really good performance. And again, this is probably what DC was hoping for from their offense, like minus the 2 interceptions that they were going to get all season long before Abraham Smith went down, and just the absolute struggles that I think we've seen from Jordan Te'amu this year being consistent as a passer. Defense, opportunistic, I think is a great way to describe them. Really good performance from them, coming away with a couple of turnovers courtesy of both Gary and Conley and Monte Nicholson pulling off a few interceptions there. Darius Victor did kind of run all over their defense, but to be fair, DC's run defense has not been great, and that is kind of where they've struggled, where it's, you'll get weeks where maybe the pass defense is a little bit better than others, but teams have been bulldozing them on the ground all season long. And I mean, Darius Victor averaged 7 yards per clip, so it is what it is at this point in the season. It's too late to call for changes now and adjustments, but beyond that, good performance from DC. You're going up against a team that is considered widely by a lot the worst team in the UFL, and in my opinion, fits that bill as well. So you come in, you stomp out the opponent. Yes, the playoffs are pretty much gone for you, or they are gone for you, but you're still putting up fights. You're still putting up good efforts, coming away with victories late season moral victories. Put on some good tape, do what you can. Happy for them to get the win. Just a little too late, Moving into the top half of the UFL now, at number 4, and this is where all the shaking up starts. Now, my bottom of the UFL has been pretty stable for a few weeks now, as has been the top, but there has been some shuffling going on. This is the most shuffling through the top half of the UFL that I have had all season, so take a seat, brace yourself here. It's about to get a little bit crazy. Coming in at number 4, with their loss this week, I have the St. Louis Battlehawks. I don't want to hold too much of this loss over the offense's head, because when you consider the injuries and what they've been dealing with on the offensive side of the ball, A.J. McCarron is, of course, not playing. Even if he was active, it was never intended he was going to play unless the injury called for him to step in. But, I mean, overall, the offense was not really the issue here. I mean, you had a strong performance from Jacob Sailors. He pushed over 100 yards. You still managed 22 points collectively on offense, even with A.J. McCarron out. And you're going up against, the Arlington Renegades. Not a great defense. So you should have found some success regardless of who was going to be under center for you in this game. And they did do just that. My real concern coming out of this game here is just the absolute struggle we saw from the defensive side of things, as you let Arlington just go absolutely crazy for 5 straight drives. And that's what put you in that spot where there was desperation late. You're heaving passes down the field, trying to get something, throwing 3 straight interceptions, trying to figure something out late in the game here. Luis Perez had his way. As I mentioned earlier, nearly 260 yards, 3 passing touchdowns. There was a point in that game where it felt like St. Louis's pass coverage just had no answers for what was going on. And that's a little bit concerning, because it's not like the offense was fumbling around, and St. Louis, I should say. It's not like St. Louis's offense was fumbling around 3 and outs, getting off the field too quick, gassing the defense, because the offense was either moving the football for like 3 minutes or so at a time, at the very least, getting scores, or just, drives ending after 4, 5, 6 plays, something like that. And even one of Arlington's final touchdown, I believe their final touchdown was after the halftime break too. So you can't point to the offense and say, the offense was getting off the field too quick, the defense was gassed, whatever it may be. I mean, there was ample opportunity for the defense to rest between these flips of possession. And I don't know what happened, because again, this is a team that, yeah, I know they've dealt with some injuries as of late, especially during these last few weeks here, but they have been the definitive best passing defense all season long. When you look at the numbers, the amount of pass breakups this team has, just the way their secondary has been able to play, and even their linebackers dropping back in coverage. I was very shocked watching, especially that midpoint of the game where things got really out of hand. They were able to kind of stop the bleeding, or at least slow the bleeding late in the game, but it was a little bit scary. And I think that the lack of a true pass rush is kind of starting to catch up with St. Louis because they rank amongst the worst in the UFL. They are tied for second last in sacks. So, I mean, there is clearly an issue that might be rearing its ugly head right now. And as you get set to the playoffs where you're going against teams that have pretty good offensive lines, they all have really good pass rushes. You don't want to be the team that can't generate pressure on defense, because pretty much every single one of the teams that you're looking at that are getting into the playoffs have had success throwing the football at certain stages. Now that Chase Garbers is coming back for the Brahmas, we saw him shake off the rust this past week. Of course, Adrian Martinez can throw the football with the best of them. We have seen him do so. And Michigan's a little kind of, we'll see what they decide to do at quarterback. Hopefully it's Bryce Perkins, because I feel like he may have earned that quarterback one role in my opinion. We'll get to that too. But you don't want to be able to pressure the quarterback and not generate that pressure and ultimately turn it into sacks as well. So that could be starting to rear its ugly head and be an issue for St. Louis here in these last few weeks of the season here. I hope it's not what winds up costing them the XFL championship game, but we'll see. But right now, hopefully this is an overreaction from me. That's what I'm hoping for, but I'm slightly concerned at just how much they let Arlington completely dominate them during the midpoint of that game. From like second quarter to third quarter, it was an absolute mess from the defense, and that is something that cannot happen at this stage of the season. Your defense needs to be sharp and ready to go for playoffs, not falling apart against a team that's 2-7 now. Just my 2 cents on that one. Next team we'll look at number 3, we still have ourselves the Michigan Panthers. As I just said, Bryce Perkins needs to be given quarterback 1. I called for this last week, and I cannot believe they didn't go with him. And of course, what do they need to do but have him come in the second half and save the team from a near loss against the Houston Roughnecks here? And this goes to my point when I was talking about the Roughnecks earlier, where it felt like Michigan nearly gave the game away as opposed to actually losing the game to the Roughnecks here, because yeah, the run game was basically non-existent, but as soon as Michigan put in the guy that I felt was worth starting in that game there, yes, drive 1 was a little bit ugly, delay a game, tipped interception, kind of scary to see that be the very first result you get from Bryce Perkins coming in. But after that, you can forget about it. It was like a completely different ball game here. Perkins comes in, puts the offense on his back, scores 3 total touchdowns, racks up nearly 200 total yards himself. I mean, I understand that there's conversation right now going on that E.J. Perry might come back next week, and there's going to be, the deliberation of who should be the quarterback. Should it be Bryce Perkins, who feels like the hot hand right now, or do you get E.J. Perry, who was riding high early in the season, although he did have some ups and downs, especially playing too much hero ball. I feel like we talked about that a lot really early in the season, but I feel like you have to ride the hot hand. Go with Bryce Perkins. Give him the opportunity. He has 3 straight weeks now of good performances where he's splitting time, coming in and playing really effectively. And if it was not for a batted interception, Bryce Perkins' game looks even better than it was, and it was in just one half of football. Give the guy his opportunity. He deserves it at this point of the season. I know you're not supposed to lose your job to injuries, but there are things that you can pick out from both Perkins and from E.J. Perry where, like, the deservingness of the starting position it depends on who you like more, I guess. But there are things you can pick out from both of their games that you can look at as negatives where you go, you could probably ride either one and be happy, but Perkins is hot right now. Maybe Perry was earlier in the season, but Perkins is hot right now. Defensively, overall, I would say a solid game, especially in the first half here. There was not really too much that I was worried about. I know that some people might look at the 22 points from Houston and go, oh, well, that was kind of scary. But, I mean, when you look at just what was going on, there was a lot going on from the offensive side of things, especially early, that kind of hurt Michigan and put them into really weird spots. The Jaron Hall touchdown catch for 63 yards, that just felt like blown coverage, and there was a clear communication thing going on prior to that play that had to have led to that. Like, you don't get someone that wide open and just race to the house on a play like that without something being lost within pre-play communication. So that's kind of what I'm looking at there. There was a strike on 3rd and 12 from Henderson to Emmanuel Butler that set up the Mark Thompson touchdown. That also just felt like Emmanuel Butler got lost in coverage. Again, not something that's very common to see from this Michigan Panthers defense, and I felt like that was a theme for them defensively. Like, they just had really random mistakes in key spots that hurt a lot. And like another example, on 3rd and 17, Henderson's allowed to hit Kiki Chisholm for a big first down. This is on the final drive there for Houston as they're trying to make that comeback. you take out those like really big errors, and it was overall a pretty good game for Michigan defensively. It's just, and like I said with the St. Louis Battlehawks, you can't be having those problems pop up now. Like, this is stuff that you should have solidified and sorted out and should not be seeing at this stage in the season, but it is bound to happen. But I'm not too worried about it. I think that the scoreboard makes the game look a little bit closer than it actually was, and I know Michigan was trailing at times, but when you saw Bryce Perkins come in that second half, you can't tell me that if Bryce Perkins was in for 4 quarters, that this game's probably not much wider apart, and it's a far more favorable win for Michigan. That's just kind of how I look at it. I don't think starting Danny Etling was the right move. I think, again, you have to ride the hot hand, give Bryce Perkins his opportunity, and I think you will find yourself in a very comfortable position next week and going into the USFL conference side of the playoffs. So I will die on that hill. Give me Bryce Perkins. I want to see the man under center, very first snap of game number 10, the finale of the UFL season. Moving in at number 2. And like I said, brace yourselves, people. And I've been being told I know ball by Stallions fans, and I'm probably going to get that card revoked today. But Stallions, you are at number 2, falling 18-9 to the San Antonio Brahmas here. The streak is over, and the offense finally met its match in what is now, I think, a defense that if you weren't too sure on buying the hype around, you have to buy the hype and then some. The struggle to create separation with San Antonio's pass coverage was very clear very early on, Jace Sternberger aside. No one was really able to get away from their guys in coverage, and there was never really much of a rhythm going on for the offense in Birmingham. They were struggling on third down. It felt like this is the best third down offense in the UFL, mind you, and it felt like they couldn't buy a third down conversion. They went 3 for 10, which is a rarity for Birmingham this season, and San Antonio being the best third down defense in the UFL, they had a lot of testing for them going on in this game here against Birmingham's offense, and they passed with flying colors through every scenario you could have asked them. They had 0 success running the football. This is, again, the league's best running offense in the UFL by a wide margin, at times averaging over 140 yards per game, and they were barely able to do anything on the ground. Your running backs totaled 16 yards on 9 carries. This was not the Birmingham offense we have been used to seeing for the last even 3 years of spring football, if you've been watching the USFL since it came back. Defensively, this is now back-to-back weeks where we're seeing some struggles against the run, and I'm not sure if it's just injuries or fatigue, whatever it may be at this stage in the season, but this is a defense that was averaging about 50 yards per game themselves allowed, and now you're looking at over 100 yards allowed in back-to-back games, so there is something worth being mentioned about that. And the other thing that I think that I need to point out with Birmingham right now, the discipline in this game was downright atrocious. Not even because they had like a load of penalties. You had 70 for nearly 80 yards, which is obviously 7 penalties and 80 yards too many. But the penalties that were happening were in such killer spots, giving first downs and 15-yarder penalties that are just like penalties that you need to stay away from at this point in the season. And it's weird because Birmingham is very disciplined. They're a very good team, and they're typically on top of this kind of stuff. But this was probably the most vulnerable I have seen the Birmingham Stallions since the reemergence of the USFL. I can't remember another game, and you could maybe argue against the Michigan Panthers earlier this year in that 20-13 win they had, but even then, like there was still some good takeaways from that. Like, this was the worst I've seen the Birmingham Stallions offense in the last 3 years that I can remember. Maybe there is a better example, but I do think that this is probably their worst performance since the reemergence of the USFL all the way up to this point here now. So I'm a little bit concerned about that as far as how they could handle San Antonio if they meet them again in the UFL Championship. San Antonio is currently putting themselves in a really good position to find themselves in a championship game opportunity, now potentially stealing home field advantage for the conference championships against St. Louis with a battered quarterback as well. And I'm going to just lean right into it here. Of course, at number 1, since we're already talking them, San Antonio, man. Talk about getting hot at the right time. I think, to quote a legend, and I know he just had an issue at a bar. This is me just being a wrestling fan here recently. Ric Flair, to be the man, you have to beat the man, or in this case, the team. I think San Antonio deserves to be the number one team in the UFL right now. When you look at what this defense has been capable of this season, they are arguably the best unit overall from top to bottom, led by guys like safety Jordan Mosley and linebacker Tavante Beckett. This defense passed the ultimate test this week and did something that I don't think I've seen a spring football team do, and that was basically come in and steal the Birmingham Stallions' lunch in this matchup here, holding them to just 9 points, 278 total yards, only 15 first downs. Like I said, 3 of 10 on third downs. You came away with 3 sacks and 5 tackles for loss as well. Some key pass breakups from cornerback Darius Phillips with a forced fumble as well. You had players stepping up all over the field in this matchup to shut things down and to put a stamp on this season that it is not going to be the undefeated year and a run to the championship the way some people were anticipating the Birmingham Stallions of doing. Quentin Dormady had to exit the game early, and this is what I think is going to be a deciding factor and more on why I think this team is hot at the right time and could catch fire next week. Quentin Dormady exits. Always hate to see that type of situation, but Chase Garbers comes in. He was the guy that really lit the fire under this offense early in the season here. He made his return clean, effective, knocking off some rust. Didn't necessarily wow anyone, but 70% completion rate, 140 yards passing. That's the type of game you want from a guy coming off of an injury that knocked him out for, nearly 2 months. For him to come back, doesn't really make any mistakes, isn't necessarily the reason why you won, but is able to, get a feel for the game again, ramp back into the situation. I think this offense can be at its absolute best with Chase Garbers under center. You have Anthony McFarland, who racked up another 116 yards off of 21 total touches on the day. You had a phenomenal trick play with your wide receiver, Jontre Kirkland, hitting a beautiful 36-yard strike for a touchdown on a trick play that just Birmingham did not see coming here. Your stars in this game on offense shined brightest when you needed them to. The defensive stars on this team shined brightest when you needed them to, and you got a massive upset victory where I don't think a lot of people were giving San Antonio much of a shot because they've had so many issues on offense over the last few weeks, aside from an emerging run game now that is very legit. There was a point where I was questioning the success of it and whether it was just a circumstance of the opponents that they had, but when you look at what they did against this Birmingham defense and how good that unit is, it wasn't a massive windfall of points. It wasn't a massive windfall of yardage, but it was a solid amount and a strong enough performance that if they meet again in the UFL Championship, I am going to need to take some serious time in considering giving the win, or potential win that is, to the San Antonio Brahmas, because they have all the makings of a phenomenal championship team right now. They've got their quarterback back. That sounds weird to say, but they got their quarterback back. They have a star running back, a star wide receiver, and a defense that will sink its teeth into you and go in for the kill. And I am so excited that a shakeup like this was able to happen this late in the season because it just complicates the way things are looking even further. And this is how it needs to be in spring football. I don't want to know the end result of the season 6 or 7 weeks into the year. I want to be at this point in the year where I have no idea what is going to happen next. I love being wrong with this kind of stuff because being right all the time, while it's nice to spout off about it, is fun. Like touting a 14-2 run is nice and dandy and whatnot, but to go into this week feeling like I had everything figured out and just completely getting knocked over by the first 2 results of the weekend, this is the type of excitement I'm looking for from spring football, and I'm pumped that this is where we are right now. So let me know in the comment section down below, what are your thoughts on my power rankings? Has anything changed for you as far as rankings go? Has your opinion on San Antonio changed the way it has for me? Let me know. But that is it. As always, if you made it to the end, I greatly appreciate it. I'll see you all next time. Have a good one.